now? Is that okay? Yes, okay, thank you. So the next question was about how the queer community itself can better support other members within our community, because we've already talked about the amount of intersectionality and the fact that you just can't, you know, we sitting here, it's very difficult for us to represent everybody, and we've said already about makeup in this room, and so in especially how we can support the trans community so more, and make sure that this whole divide and rule thing is not successful, and how do we as the members of the queer community fight that? Paul?
I think, again, it's a very big question to answer, but I think for me it's about recognizing similarities and recognizing the fundamental humanity behind all of us, and providing that mutual respect, love, affection is something that I think fundamentally is what's enormously helpful. I also think having strong role models is really, really important. We talked about visibility in the media, and I think that's very, very important. And we're certainly in regards to kind of our trans siblings, we're seeing more of that, and I feel like we're seeing more positive role models in the media from the trans experience. But simultaneously, I want to see people who are in power, who may be bisexual or not visibly queer in the same way, standing up and being role models for our communities. And I think that'll be, and actually role models for taking positive steps to embrace those who may be more naturally or maybe more alienated through their visibility.
Thank you, Paul. Amy?
Yes. I was just considering what you were saying.
I like that we never know where you're going to go. That's
yeah, you know, we have to work together, but in order to do that, we also need to be able to do that and resilient ourselves, and that is incredibly difficult within a community where we know that there are high levels of mental ill health within our communities, and but within our service, you know, self-care, self-love is our mantra, and I guess it's, you know, it's so important that we are doing that, looking after ourselves and looking after each other, and having that because we cannot. We know that in activist circles and communities, burnout is so high. We know the emotional and mental toll that this work can have on us, because we're not just doing activist work. It isn't about other, it's about us. You know, it is the work that we are doing as activists has a massive, you know, it is about our rights and it's about our freedoms, and that comes with an emotional toll, and so it is incredibly important that we are also doing that work to look after ourselves, to know when to step back, to know when to get support. And I guess, you know, and I think one of the really important things we need to do is build that within our activism, build that within our planning. In the words of Audre Lorde, you know, self-care is you know, it is political activism, it is political, and it is incredibly important. And so we, you know, when we are building our movements, when we are building our work, we also need to be building that into how we're planning and how we're moving forward.
So here's the thing. Being a member of the LGBTQ plus community doesn't automatically make you an ally to the other parts of the community which you do not personally identify as. And I think I don't want to be negative about it, but I think it's very realistic to bring that up, because we don't just get hatred from people who are outside of our community. It does exist within, and I think that historically that is a huge part of the problem for our trans friends and family, that they never seem to have had a break from anything, And even when, gay liberation movement first was a thing, trans people weren't really included in that. And I feel like that's just developed just in different ways as society has developed. And for a lot of people, that comes from maybe the way that they've been treated, and then they're kind of projecting that onto other people. There might be sort of like internalized homophobia and personal biases that people may not even be aware of, because if people aren't bringing that up to you, then how would you know? So I think there's the reality of the situation where we have to move through our own biases where they present themselves. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to fully support one another, or we are, but only to a certain extent. And that's not necessarily enough. And I mean, I think a lot of what Amy was saying about sort of self-love and self-care is relevant here, because the more you learn about yourself, the more you grow as a person, the more you maybe understand how you feel about certain other things, and the more able you are then to move past them in order to support yourself and the people around you. And yeah, I just think that's a huge thing. So in terms of something maybe more actionable, it's just being open to the experiences and perspectives of other people, as well as protecting yourself, which I think is incredibly important to bring up. But if you're not even willing to listen to a different perspective than your own, then yeah, nothing will change, nothing at all. And that may seem like a small interaction in one instance, but that is then echoed and ripples out nationally, globally. So I just think we have to be cautious, open, and just willing to learn about other people, because otherwise we don't know how to support those other people.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Yes, I think we're all on a huge learning curve, aren't we? And I think that's something definitely about us learning all the time as well. Okay, so I've got one more question, and then we can open it up to the floor. And so this is a question that's about Suffolk Pride. So it says, what role do you think Suffolk Pride could play in promoting positive mental health and in addressing the causes of poor mental health in Suffolk? Ben. Sorry.
Well, to be honest, I think events like this, like facilitating more conversations and more spaces where people feel safe to come to, is super important. But as also we have kind of done today, is pinpointing that who isn't in the room, and then tailoring events and whatever to the more marginalised, or at least asking the question and trying to figure out why those people aren't here, to then guide the future of Suffolk Pride and how they interact with people. As much as I'm very aware that obviously a lot of Pride stuff happens in the month of Pride, there should obviously be the support there to be able to bring events like this all year round. And I don't think we should be afraid of addressing maybe the more negative stuff, because ultimately that will become a positive in terms of learning about an experience or a perspective, or how to best manage a situation, etc., etc. Yeah, rambling now, so cool.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Amy.
Okay. I mean, I think you're doing a pretty good job of it. I remember, like, when the first Suffolk Pride was getting organised, I'm ashamed to say I was a bit like, coming down from Glasgow, I was like, oh, the first Suffolk Pride, it will be, you know, how cute. And it was so great. And I was, that first one was just, well, I mean, it was just so brilliant, wasn't it? That and like the visibility and the being there and the joy that was in that space, and it was so lovely. And there were so many people, you know, so many young people that were seeing pride, you know, like actual pride, but, you know, people being prideful. And it's incredibly important when there are not that many visible representations of that within Suffolk. So that, and, you know, we need to be talking about the issues that our communities face, and we need to be talking about how we can support those people that need help. But equally, we also need to kind of project and show joy. You know, I think one of the things, you know, when, I'm assuming most of us growing up, depending on your age, you know, so much of what we saw was just misery. It was, whether that was the AIDS pandemic, whether it was homophobia, or whether it's Section 28, all of these things were negative. And, you know, we grew up being told that if you were gay, if you were bi, I mean, no one even talked about if you were trans, but that you would have a, you know, that would be a shame because you would have a hard life. And that might be the case, but it doesn't have to be the case. And, you know, having spaces where we can project joy and show actually that for a lot of us, we have no shame, we have no, you know, we are incredibly proud of our lives and who we are, is really important, I think.
Thank you, Amy. Paul.
I again, I 100% agree with every point you make. I think it's interesting because I was always, so I've lived here for about 10 years. When I heard there was going to be the first Suffolk Pride, I was a bit like, what, really? Here? I felt almost a sense of, I don't know what it is, not shame, but almost embarrassment for Suffolk, because we're always small, and we've only just had a university built in 2016, and we're not a city, and our football team doesn't do well, and I think we can naturally be quite down on ourselves in the town, saying, I'll go on, but I think we can be quite down on ourselves, and I think what's really important is Suffolk Pride is about shining a light on a really important area for us, for all the reasons we're already describing, but actually about having Suffolk as a county take ownership and build an identity for something, and I would love to see that grow further and further and get bigger. I think starting off with something like this is incredibly important, so carry on doing things like that. There's something for me around, it's also very easy for us to become quite youth-centric. So something I'm also very aware of is, what about the queer people in their 60s, 70s, 80s? What do we do? Do we even think about them as part of our audience for an event like this? So again, I'm making assumptions, I'm sure you have, but it's the sort of thing I would always be very mindful of. How do we reach out beyond the groups that we already engage with, particularly around age and ethnicity?
Thank you, Paul. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That's a very comprehensive starting off. So really, it's over to the audience, really. If you've got anything that you would like to ask, or whether you've got any points you'd like to raise. Peter, I don't actually know how to get you to speak to me. Can you shout, and then I can maybe relay it? Sorry, we need to have a roving mic. These are attached to things. Hello, Peter.
Nice to see you. If anyone can't hear you, it matches with what you just said in that further question. So there's some unison support in the room. So unison and unite are on the banners. My question is very easy, and unfortunately I'm going to add one complexity, which is, could all four of you answer it, because in fairness, you would know this better than I would. What can you do in partner activism to help in Suffolk?
Thank you, Peter. Right, so I actually chair the Suffolk County branch of Unison, but I'm not going to answer that first, because I'm the chair tonight. I'm going to be really nasty, and I'm going to ask our participants, our panel first. So I'm going to start with, who am I going to start with? Amy, please.
I don't know. I had a very brief stint as the bi rep for Unison Scotland. And so I guess I had we've had a lot of those conversations back then. I guess it's about solidarity again, isn't it? You know, creating those spaces and kind of really representing our communities within our workplaces. And I think one of the things that I definitely saw when I was involved in union stuff, and LGBT union stuff specifically, was that it was often dominated by a very narrow section of kind of gay and lesbian white people, and you know, and actually so it's very much, and and that often drove the focus of that work. And so I think having that, you know, what you can do for the community, I would say, is do this work. You know, the thinking intersectionally, thinking more broadly about the wider LGBT community.
Thank you, Amy. Ben, your turn.
Cool. I mean, so my sort of knowledge of unions is very little. But so apologies if this is not relevant, but all I would really say is you need a start point, like knowing maybe who are the LGBTQ plus members that exist within your ranks, as it were, would be the most obvious starting point for me, because there will be the people that need to be visible or need to at least be acknowledged if you're taking any kind of action. But I don't know, the whole phrase social responsibility is just in my head for some reason, and you know, going into communities and actually seeing what you can offer people would be what I would say, at least as a starting point. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but there we go.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Paul, your turn.
In my job, I have to deal with unions all the time, and it's not always the most enjoyable interaction of my day. So if I take that hat off and I look at it from a different perspective, I think what I would say is that it's really, really, really important to be the most powerful advocates you can be for the workers and for individuals' rights, and to be as stubborn and dogged in the pursuit and the advocacy of those things is what I would say unions should do, unless you work with me, in which case just be very nice to work with and not too dogged, please.
Thank you very much, Paul. I want to answer that actually with 3 different points I'd like to make to that. I think one of Unison, I think, is about 1.5 million members, isn't it? The vast majority of which are women, and I can't remember what the numbers are, but it's a really 75%. Do you reckon, Josie? Yes. So it's an incredibly big number, and it's a potential for political activism and getting some of these messages across is really significant. So I think as Unison members, that's something that we should remember, that there's a force there. And I think it's, for those of us that are activists, I think it's really about helping educate people, really trying to make sure that everybody in the union is switched on to some of these issues, and we're very keen on that, and our own LGBT plus group in Unison is very keen on allyship and training and trying to make sure, because it is exactly the point we've made earlier, haven't we, that even if you might be part of this community but you don't know all there is to know, you might be a Unison member but you certainly don't know all there is to know, and so it's about trying to increase training and allyship in that way. So that's one. The other one I would say is actually within Unison we do have 4 different self-organised groups. So there is an LGBT plus part of the union, there's a black members part of the union, there's a women's part of the union, and there's a disabled members part of the union. And what we keep saying actually locally in Suffolk is that we want to really make sure those groups do all communicate with each other. So instead of operating, and this is what's happened so often, isn't it? You end up in little strands or little silos, and it's so important that we actually do cross-contaminate, we actually cross-fertilise, we work together and collaborate, and that's something that I think we're trying to do jointly. And then the other point, I think, is, again, when you think about unions and we think about social responsibility and we think about the equality issues, but one of the biggest issues, and I'm an environmentalist by training, so one of the biggest issues of our time is around climate change, isn't it, and carbon emissions and what's happening to our planet. I mean, it's happening. And it is so wrong if we end up having, over there we'll worry about the environment, and over here we'll worry about people and equality. The social justice or injustice is the same as environmental injustice and environmental justice. So they're the two sides of the same coin, and I really think that that's a message that we have to try and get across. These are the biggest issues of our time. They are the biggest issues. That's it, end of, full stop. And so that's me ranting on now, I think, isn't it? So that's what I'd say in answer to that question. Thank you, Peter. And we're very grateful for Unison support, I have to say, for Suffolk Pride. We are very grateful. Has anybody else got another question or comment, observation? Josie? Thank you, Josie. Did everybody hear that? Do I need to repeat it so that you can hear that? Do I need to repeat it for you, Dara? Is it okay? You've got that. Oh, repeat the question. Okay, so the question from one of our audience was she has just heard of somebody who's gone newly into a care home and has announced that she is gay or lesbian, and it's the first time that this has happened in somebody who's been running a care home, quite a long time working in care homes, is the first time it's happened. So how can we make sure that for older people, this is something that we can provide for? I guess, is that the question? Making safe spaces for... Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Bringing people out of care homes and into Pride. Love it. Thank you. Okay, Paul.
and hi, Josie. I can't tell who anyone is with the masks on, so as soon as I know people, it's lovely. Great question. So I think I'm doing a piece of research at the moment which is looking at the experiences of older gay men specifically, and I'm starting to play with the term kind of a grey closet, because I think in society generally we tend to think of older people as becoming increasingly asexual. They lose their sexual identity. I think society can perceive that older people, both heterosexual or homosexual, lose their sexual identity. And I think, but there's a bigger issue for queer older people, because that's often tied up with identity and indeed that stigma that we were describing. is potentially felt more acutely by that age group. Again, I'm making assumptions, and I'm sure this isn't the case in every respect. So, huge issue, and I think it's going to get worse. If I'm lucky enough to be in my 80s, what sort of care home do I want to go in? Or do I have to become kind of desexualized in order to exist happily in that space? So, massive issue. I think in London somewhere they're talking about building kind of an LGBT residential home, and it looks incredibly expensive and flash and lovely, and none of us will ever be afford to live there. So I think the issue for me is about language, imagery. We keep talking about visualization and kind of visibility being so important. So actually, do people get asked the question, so this is an issue I get in hospitals a lot, do people ask the question, or do they make an assumption of heterosexuality, and therefore is it increasingly difficult to repeatedly come out time and time again, particularly if you're an older person and you may have a heavier weight of stigma around that experience? So are we open to it in the very first introduction, or do we assume heterosexuality and make one individual come out when they felt comfortable enough? And it's great that they felt comfortable enough. And I guess I would ask the question to you, what did your partner do or not do that made them feel comfortable to do that? So I think there's about visibility, not making assumptions, being careful of the language we use. Don't create barriers for people to repeatedly come out when if they may be reluctant to do so. Maybe it's about visuals. Maybe it's actually about having some LGBT friendly pictures on the wall. How can we do it so that it is more normalised? And hopefully it will be increasingly normalised as we get older. I have a sneaking suspicion that actually that grey closet may loom for a lot of us if we're not careful. And as we get to the point of time where we become institutionalised and we lose some of our sexual and our individual autonomy, it's a bit of a scary space to find yourself wandering into.
Thank you, Paul. Ben?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, a lot of it comes down to like making sure that people that work in a care home environment or who are in a position of caring for someone, that they actually would feel comfortable interacting with someone who is LGBTQ+, and hopefully that would be the case. But they might not necessarily know if they need to act in a particular way, or whether they know about pronouns or anything. So the kind of diversity and inclusion training, as a horrible a phrase that is just a necessity, and I think is a framework which can then be built upon. I do think that organisations generally, not restricted to care, are very slowly becoming more open to the idea that they can appeal to more people. And I think it's slowly, we're slowly getting there in terms of like a workplace. But I do think it's difficult, because I do think a lot of people in care homes are just forgotten about, especially from the outside world. Like you're in a care home and it's like, bye. But then I feel like because of that, the people that are inside providing the support need to be almost experts in caring for all people, because if there is suddenly no sort of stimulus from the outside world, then they need to know that they can feel safe and express who they are completely within those 4 or however many walls. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Ben. Amy, any comments?
Yeah, I guess, all of those things. Those basic things that you should be doing in any space, isn't it? About, using pronouns, about having visible markers of inclusion, all of those things are just part and parcel of that. I believe, if you don't want to go all the way to London to talk about LGBT care homes, I believe that the Norfolk LGBT plus project did some work in care homes fairly recently. I guess, doing that work of training, awareness raising with staff. So there's stuff going on, even in places that you wouldn't necessarily imagine it. I can't think of much more to add, really. That feels... Yeah.
Thank you, Amy. I know a few years ago, Age Concern here in Suffolk, actually, they put together some information, didn't they, for older people in care homes, and how to, how to make your care home so that it was actually, it seemed a safe place. Lois Peachy wrote the report on behalf of of Age Concern, yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so I think there has been some, it's starting to be looked at, or there has been some information. Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a long way to go, I think, isn't there? Definitely, but yeah, certainly, because every single care home has got to be accommodating. It can't just be a separate space, can it? Any other questions, comments, observations? Go for it, Josie. The police bill, right? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the question was around the police bill and about our rights being eroded, and how can we continue to be activists and try to fight for the right things if we find ourselves in situations which are deemed to be illegal, I guess is what they're going to be. Does that include Pride and everything else we get involved with? And it's a really alarming prospect. So that's the question. Where should we start? Oh, I don't know. Amy.
I thought you might do that. Well, we obviously need to fight to make sure that that doesn't happen, that it has to be a kind of, it is absolutely fundamental. And it goes back to so much of what we've already been talking about today about collectivism. We need to work collectively because this impacts on so many marginalised and minoritized people. It is, it is, that feels like, that kind of flashpoint that is showing us that there is a concerted effort to erode our rights. We absolutely need to fight against that. And I think kind of your comment about whether or not Pride will remain a protest, what we're seeing is that it is increasingly not a protest. We are seeing that it is commercialized, and it is the politics has been actively and kind of purposefully removed from that. And I remember the conversations that we had when we were first starting to plan the first Pride here was around that protest versus party discussion. And I disagreed with quite a lot of people in the room about that and where it should sit, because the moment that we start depoliticizing Pride, and the moment we start kind of seeing it as just a party and a celebration, that we lose our power. And so it's incredibly important that we maintain Pride as a celebration and something that is fun and joyous, but also it has to maintain as a protest.
Thank you, Amy. Ben.
If anyone's good at adapting, I think the LGBTQ plus community are. I don't necessarily think that if if protesting is made officially illegal, one, that will stop anyone, and two, I just think it will just change. Like, similar to what Amy was saying before about activism, self-care being an act of activism, is, I think we're very, when we think of protest, we think of, it's very narrow-minded, like it's people on the streets, that it's large visible acts of something, fighting for something very obviously, but protest takes so many forms that you can't eradicate them all. And even an event like this, where we're actively talking about how we can change, is political, like to some, is an act of protest for others. Like it's all about getting the information out there and coming together, as we've all talked about, and making sure we're including everyone. Because if, our rights are slowly just eroded away and taken from us, then we have to find new ways of becoming stronger, and that will mean doing it in more social settings and doing it in a way where we're still connecting with each other, but maybe not in the middle of London. Or there are so many different avenues you can take, I think. So as much as this bill should not happen and should never have even been up for debate, there's always been a huge array of ways that people can protest. And it also, accessibility again needs to come into it. Like, certain forms of protest are only accessible to some people. So, if you're trying to include everyone, then you need to think about how your action is inclusive or not, and to make those kind of changes, which are always done behind the scenes and are always done through talking to other people and connecting in a more social way, I suppose.
Thank you, Ben. Paul.
I like going last, because as you talk, I'm like, oh yeah, that's triggered something. That's good. I was sat with my dad I live near Christchurch Park, and me and my dad and his wife had a pint outside the Woolpack. There most Fridays, and we were just chatting away, and they said, "Well, it's getting quite difficult these days, isn't it?" And I said, "What is?" To white people, retired, living a lovely life. What's difficult? They said, "Well, you can't. There's so many things you can't say." I went, what are you talking about? And so these are people who, and my dad, not thrilled to have a gay son, admittedly, but he's come a long way. He's a good man. He's a good man, and he was. Well, there's so many things you can't offend people. I said, Dad, you just don't be a dick. Don't be a dick. Be nice to people. Be accepting. Or try not to offend people, and you're going to be okay. But you're right, and I think that's why I mentioned the culture wars earlier, and there is something really insidious and it's very, I find it genuinely sinister happening around language and terminology and iconography that's really problematic. Something when during the pandemic I was doing a lot of work with hospitals. I kept seeing people with pride lanyards. I was thinking, that's brilliant, and I hadn't realised until really for quite some time how the rainbow had been co-opted. Now, we don't own the rainbow. It's not something one can own intellectual property of, but there's been something about that being stripped away, and I'm sure it wasn't insidious, but I'm not 100% convinced it wasn't. So I guess the advice that I would have is if we're not able to campaign, well then what should we do? Well, first thing we should do is we should educate our youth about LGBTQ plus history. We should tell people about where we've come from as a people, what we've had to experience, what those difficulties have been, and try and impart those lessons, try and push that knowledge forward, because so many people don't know about those stories. I don't know about every single story, but it's something that's fundamentally missing from our identities. And actually what a community coalesces around stories and legacies and narratives, and if we lose those, then we lose really a fundamental part of our history. How many people who you encounter know about Alan Turing and what happened to him? And now he's on a £50 note and he bit that cyanide apple because we fucking chemically castrated him. That's what that apology was for from Gordon Brown. And people whitewash over those narratives, and that's just the least of it. So we need to educate our youth, and if we can't protest, we should educate, and if we should always be able to educate, and we should disrupt. We should be disruptive, not violently so, not in a way that, or I would argue not violently so, others may have a different view, but be disruptive, break that narrative, be yourselves, be authentic and honest and true, and wear your earrings and your nail varnish, or choose not to, but still do things in a different way. Be proactive, push those boundaries. So I think for me, it's through education and continual disruption and a sense of authenticity that's so vitally important for us all.
Here. Thank you, Paul. Have you got any other questions or observations? That was quite powerful stuff. Hello. Gosh, thank you for that question. I'm not going to paraphrase it, but I'm just going to try and give an indication of what you were covering. So it was about training as a psychotherapist, having lots of modules over a period of years, 3 years or so, and actually there not being one module or sort of part of that course which actually looks at LGBT plus issues and sexuality and gender issues, gender diversity and all those things. And so lack of representation, and how are we going to basically train, or how are we going to come out as good psychotherapists in the workplace, in the real world, if you haven't had that sort of training? Discuss was the response, wasn't it? Right, so let's discuss. Thank you. So shall we start with Ben?
So in my experience, in terms of what I'm seen in the world, you're 100% not alone in thinking that, and maybe somehow trying to connect with those other people that feel the same way as you, because you don't want to be doing all that work by yourself, because that's a lot. And you've got you know, by you bringing it up, you obviously want to make change, but you also obviously, as we've kind of said, you need support in that as well. So I think, I don't know, it's that difficult thing of trying to connect with the right people who may already be qualified and fully fledged therapists in whatever field. I know it's definitely an afterthought, but there is definitely people out there who have acknowledged that it is a problem that LGBTQ plus needs are not being addressed in that capacity, and they are doing work towards it, but that's few and far between, and is always in hotspots, city hotspots like London and stuff, and it just takes so long to feed through if we just let it naturally gravitate towards us. Gosh, what to do? Without completely exhausting yourself, being visible in saying that you want to approach this with the support of others, I think is a worthwhile step, because one, I think you'll be surprised at maybe how much support you will get as an individual, but you might even be surprised at how many people around you are already gunning for the same things. Yeah, that's what I would say. But please take care of yourself.
I have a lot of thoughts on this, so I'll try and be concise. What I would first say is get trained quick, because we are desperate for diverse therapists in our world. It is incredibly difficult to get. One of the many reasons why our waiting list is so massive at the moment is because it's really, really hard to get great therapists in at the moment. And what we see is it is so important that we have diverse therapists within our services and in therapeutic work. And I'm not saying at all that straight cis people cannot work with LGBTQ people, but there is something really powerful about having that shared lived experience and shared understanding in the room. Within our service, what we see is often women come to us and say, I think I'm bisexual. Is that because I was raped? There is that kind of narrative, and being able to and I'm not saying that straight people cannot explore that and do that work, but it is, there is something particularly important there. And it's about, we talk about power within our service so much, and kind of how we hold power within therapeutic spaces is so important. And so it is, it's important for all therapists to have that understanding of that and being able to explore that properly, and to be able to analyze their own practice as well. And if you don't have that space within your training to do that, then unless you actively seek it out, as you've seen, it's just not there. So it is really important, and we are seeing more and more specialist therapeutic services popping up. And again, as I said right at the beginning there, online therapy has expanded so much, and so it is, there are more spaces, and I would say that there are more opportunities to be able to do that work within specialist spaces now that there weren't even a year or so ago. But I would also, we've also talked about how we don't necessarily have a collective shared experience. So for example, I was talking to a friend the other day who was seeing a therapist, and they're recently started identifying as non-binary, and they kind of actively sought out a queer therapist, and that therapist she was a lesbian woman, and just got completely obsessed by how the kind of relationship problems that were happening in my friend's relationship were due to her, but due to her kind of her partner and their kind of conflict around their gender identity, and they were like, that is not what's going on here, but couldn't move past it. So I guess it's just kind of an example of how we all have those things, and and that's kind of part of all of us working on kind of challenging our own thinking around that. So it's complicated, but yeah, get trained.
Definitely. Thank you, Amy. Paul, your turn.
So as a dean of a school and a university, I have run a lot of courses. I don't run any course like yours, so it's not my watch. But you would think that someone from my position, with the beliefs and the some of the passions I've got, I would be very clear on what LGBTQ plus content is being delivered on my courses. But I'm not. Because it probably hasn't really occurred to me to ask those sort of questions. So I think it's a really good point you raise, and it's a really good learning point for me. And as I sit here, I think actually I really need to go and review the curriculum and see what's being taught, because if I was a student, I know what I would be expecting. And if you have the people who are in power, not including someone like myself, not having those thoughts and not thinking through those implications, then there's a problem there. So it's a problem I've got to look at. And I might be pleasantly surprised, but I bet I won't be. And I think from you, what should you do? So that's what I need to do. What do you need to do is, I think, challenge and actually, if you don't get a satisfactory answer from your course leaders, go to the head of department, go to the head of school, go to the student union, escalate and raise those points, because what we were saying earlier about kind of that agitation is really, really important. You're not asking for the world, you're asking for very, very little. And you need to be treated with respect and dignity, and see that your colleagues go on a learning journey that maps at least some of your values. It's incredibly important. So I would agitate and disrupt and make a fuss while protecting yourself. I like what Ben said, by protecting yourself too. But I think it's really important. Write anonymous letters. It's brilliant. Or freedom of information requests, because they have to respond to that by law. They never know where it comes from, and it uncovers things. They do pay attention to that.
Thank you very much for that question. That was excellent. Any other observations or requests that we discuss something? Are we panelled out? Mental health out? Hello. Thank you for that. That's a question saying, would anybody like to share a success story about support they've given or received? Oh, another person in the audience. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Go ahead, please. Brilliant, thank you so much. And there's no way I'm going to try and paraphrase any of that, because that was brilliant, exactly how you said it, so thank you so much for that. Any other success stories that we want to say in response, or where we've had support or given support?
I don't have permission to share details of this story, so I'm going to be slightly careful. I think there was someone very close to me was suffering from, or was experiencing, suicidal thoughts, and I had no idea that that was even something that they would even be on the precipice of experiencing. And so the success from that was that we were able to communicate about it and recognize, and through that communication and actually having a strong rapport, we were able to resolve the issue and get that person help. And I think for me, so what I have never experienced, I don't believe, any mental health challenges personally. So again, from my position of privilege, which I refer to a lot, it wasn't a reality that I had line of sight of. So I think, but to be able to communicate and to be able to talk and to recognize that that person was in crisis, even though I didn't think they were ever going to be anywhere near that, was something which was really powerful.
Thank you, Paul. Any more for any more? I've got a story. Do you want to hear my story?
Go on.
Okay, so when I was working, I've been working for Suffolk County Council for some time, and I was involved in the staff network when I first came out, because I came out when I was about 44, which is a while ago now, very late, and that's not the story. And part of my coming out was having to make a lot of noise about it, and so getting involved in LGBT plus networks and things like that, and again finding my people and that was my support. I kept going to work. People were saying to me, because I was having all sorts of issues and panic attacks and all the rest of it, don't go to work, you need time out. No, I needed to go to work. That was my support group, because I met people who were queer, and that was absolutely awesome. But so part of my thing was going on to staff network, and then I became the chair of the staff network, one of those horrible people that have to chair things, and became chair of the staff network. And I remember this was probably about 5 years ago or so, and a guy contacted me on email, and he said, I'd like to meet you and talk. And I had no idea what this was about or anything, and it was very sort of hush-hush, and I had to meet him in the park. He was so terrified of what he was going to say to me. And so I met him in the park. He didn't want me to, nowhere within the council buildings, right outside. And it was because he was had lots of questions about his own gender identity. And he was a married man, and he was just in complete bits. Now, I'm nowhere near a mental health work or anything, but just listening to him and just trying to be try to give him an avenue, somewhere to go, somewhere else, some links into some other people and some other groups. And what I don't know what's happened to him. I hope he's okay, and I hope all they're okay. I hope they're fine. But I think what's interesting to me now is in the staff network group now, we have trans people who can come into the group And they can be trans, and they can be trans in the organisation. I still think it's very difficult for those people, and I think the organisation still has an awful long way to go. But I didn't have to get taken out into the middle of the park and hidden behind a tree to talk to this person. These, you know, our community is there. It is more visible, and I think that is progress. So that's my sort of positive story. There's still a heck of a long way to go, but I do think we are going in the right direction. Ben, your turn. You're giggling.
Always giggling. Gosh, I'm trying to think. I feel like the things in my life are heading towards being success stories, but they're still in progress. What I will say is that I'm very proud that with Guy Cry Club, even though I launched it in 2019, so it still feels very young, and quite naturally it has gravitated towards more of the queer community, and I just love that because like I didn't have to do anything. Like I was just, the most I did was be myself within it, and then all these people who identify across LGBTQ+ were just like, were wanting to get involved and wanting to talk about the same things as me, and you know, just to help that little space grow. And I think the only real reason that it's been so well received, which I'm very grateful for, is because of the queer community, and that's just, yeah, it's just great. I love it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you.
I guess the success story that I've seen most recently is I feel like it is vital and really important to I guess give a shout out to my team at Suffolk Rape Crisis, who I am constantly staggered by the work that they do, but particularly over the last year and a half, you know, we have seen incredibly high levels of need and crisis coming into our service, and like the work that they've done has just been so amazing, and have, like, we kind of say it as a bit of a cliche, but they have like literally saved women's lives this year. It has been absolutely incredible, and done that and like built communities and really built queer communities within our space as well, and providing that safe space for women. And it's been pretty extraordinary. And I think on a slightly lighter note, my personal success story recently has been that my 4-year-old son corrected me on pronouns. I was talking about his new teacher when he starts school in September, and he was like, "Mummy, they might be a they." And I guess it kind of, you know, I was talking about this earlier in the week with one of our women's groups at work. I was doing an ally workshop with everybody, and I guess it kind of used it as an example of like, this stuff is not hard, this is not difficult, like we're having to learn new stuff as adults, but actually this generation will just hopefully learn this stuff as they go, and it will be normal and natural and usual, which feels really good.
Lovely, thank you. Absolutely agree. And I'm hoping that, again, with the curriculum, the input that's going to be in the curriculum on relationship and sex education, where we should be talking about other families and all sorts of different weird and wonderful things, that will become from the very, very start of school, talking about people's relationships and people's sexuality and people's gender identity, is something that kids will grow up with, and that's got to be taking us into a better place. Have we got any more comments, questions, observations? Yes. Hello, nice to meet you. Okay, thank you. That was a question from Dominic, who runs a piercing studio, and they are currently doing there's a sort of nationwide survey on how they can make piercing studios more accessible or friendly for the LGBTQ plus community. And to understand more about what the experiences are for LGBTQ people in piercing studios. Lovely, thank you. I don't know what we're going to say to that other than thank you for letting us know. That's and that we can. If you tell Suffolk Pride, we can get some information out. I mean, we have got our social media, and so info@Suffolk Pride is where to go for email, and then we've got social media.
Where's your piercing
Facebook, all
parlour?
that stuff.
Oh yes, yes, no, it's no.
It's at Snappy Snaps. Brilliant.
Get some free publicity.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Good. Any other? Oh yes.
Gotcha. That's what I knew it was. I'm that old.
Josie, I'm that old. Yes, evolutions. Yes, art. Yes. Tell us about what's going on there, Ben, please.
Well, so it was just a pop-up exhibition that myself and Sarah, aka Cherry Fizzwiz, was involved with. It was during the first week of Ronin Body Art's opening. And because it was still officially Pride Month, Dominic very kindly offered the space to queer artists. So we very much did that. We took the entire space. It was actually a really good example of when someone does create that space for someone, people will come, because the day was just wonderful. It was just full of so many people, so many kind people who just wanted to see what was on offer, and people that me and Sarah, like, yes, we did know, but also just people we'd never met before, and it was just like, cool. If you create it, people will come. So yeah, it was wonderful.
Brilliant, thank you. And that's why, Ben, when I met you and you came in the door, and I know you, and I've seen some of your work, and we couldn't work out where it was, and that was where it was on. Must be on Facebook, wasn't it? Thank you. Yes, it was brilliant. Thank you. Good. How are we doing? Any more for any more? I'm conscious we're getting near 8 o'clock, aren't we? Or do we think we might be done? I think we might be done. What do the panel people think? Have we got anything that we want to add? Anything that we've missed out?
I just have a little something. And I did mean to say it before, and we kind of alluded to it but not said it explicitly, and I think it's important to, is that just being part of the LGBTQ plus community doesn't mean you will have mental ill health. It's because I think we get a bit hung up on it, and we forget how powerful a statement that is. Like, it's very much something which is more likely to happen because of the things that we face in life, but there are people who are not necessarily affected in the same way, and those people are really good role models for life, either sort of managing mental ill health or moving past it. So I think just a note to celebrate that is worthwhile.
Thank you, Ben. I think that's a very good point to finish on. Thank you very much, Ben. I just want to say thank you very much to all of our speakers, for Paul, Ben and Amy, for coming along this evening. Thank you. And thank you also for the audience for your time. It's lovely to see you here, actually, real live people. It's brilliant. Nice. Thank you very much. And like I say, this is just the start of some of the Pride events that we've got going on through the rest of this month. So please go onto the Facebook pages, and we've got Sarah in the corner who knows all about what's happening social media-wise. We're on Instagram, Facebook, all the other ones. We're going to be having a trans panel here, actually, which is going to be taking place on the, which day is that? 16th, next Friday. So we're going to have a trans panel then. And then on the 17th, the day afterwards, there's going to be an LGBTQ plus and sports panel, which is going to be interesting, at the Ipswich Town Football Club. And then the big Suffolk Pride having a bash weekend is going to be the 24th and 25th of July. They're going to be sort of outdoor events, but they are going to be with people events and also streamed. And the 24th is going to be at Cult, and we're going to start off with roller skating. I don't know how good we are at roller skating. Oh, good. I'm glad we've got some roller skaters in the audience. So we're going to be doing that and having some a stage and some music and things outside happening at Cult. It's called Going Out on the 24th. And on the 25th, we're going to have a rainbow stage and pride picnic in Christchurch Park in front of the mansion there. So we're going to take over the lawn, and we're just going to have a stage, and we're going to have acoustic stuff going on and lots of stuff for families and kids. There's going to be some yoga and some, I don't know, all sorts of other sorts of things that we're going to be doing. But pride picnics, that we're trying to encourage people to have picnics on that day, either in Christchurch Park with us or in other parts of the county. And it's all happening, you know, in the flesh and online, so we look forward to seeing you at some of those events. And thank you ever so much, everybody, for being here tonight. Thank you, thank you. Oh, and thank you, Dara. I should have said thank you so much.